Hello, everybody. My name is Pavlo Oborski. I'm the Grants Management Branch Chief here at the Division of Boating Safety. I've been here for going on 16 years and over 28 years of federal service, all in grant making here in the federal government and in Coast Guard. This presentation will highlight the recreational boating safety funding, and it will also involve how the funding that we distribute is calculated from the Sport Fish Restoration Trust Fund and how it's eventually distributed over to the Coast Guard for distribution. We're going to discuss all the fiscal year 2026 funding that was available to the three programs managed by the Division of Boating Safety. I'll give you an overview of the National Nonprofit Organization Grant Program and discuss a little bit of what was funded last year. I'll give you an overview of the grants process for this coming year in terms for how we review the grants, how we award the grants, how that gets posted in grants.gov. And I'll also go over the changes that we anticipate for this year for future grant awards that we're going to fund. First, to the Sport Fish Restoration Trust Fund. Basically, it's a user pay, user benefits program. What that means is some of the dollars that are spent, that you as a boater spend on boating and fishing, have a tax. That tax gets collected by the Treasury and eventually gets put into this trust fund. Some of these revenues and taxes collected, which you pay into, include motor fuel taxes, import duties on boats and yachts, and taxes on fishing and equipment. This past year, nearly $800 million was collected and then distributed. The Coast Guard received about $148 million of that funding, and this amounts to nearly 19% of the overall trust fund did go to the Coast Guard. The current authorization for the Sport Fish Restoration Trust Fund ends this fiscal year on September 30th. We are waiting to see what Congress does in terms of reauthorization. In FY 2026, the Coast Guard received over $148 million from the Sport Fish Restoration Trust Fund from the Department of Interior. We did have to sequester $8.5 million of that amount this year. However, the amount we sequestered last year, we did get back to amounting to nearly $8 million. We do have to take into account there's almost $16 million that we take off the top to account for our program administration of our program. That pays for most of our salaries, our travel, our supplies, and a lot of our expenses related to the RBS grant program. We have to also take into account taking out 5% of the calculation for nonprofit grants. For 2026, we have over $6.5 million available for the nonprofit program. We did not have any prior year admin funds that we're recovering, so that doesn't get added to the calculation. But we did have grant funds that we recovered from the states amounting to over $2 million. So the overall state distribution that we have is $127 million. So bottom line, when it gets to the grant funding this year, there's $127 million to the states for FY26, almost $6.6 million to the nonprofit program for FY26, and year 4 of the National Recreational Boating Safety Survey for $1.5 million. So that amounts for the 3 grant programs that we have for fiscal year 2026. Up to 5% of the trust fund allocation we receive goes to the National Nonprofit Organization Program. This is distributed to national nonprofit organizations for boating safety activities. Historically, we funded the full or nearly full amount available for distribution. For fiscal year 2025, we funded 26 awards for almost $6.2 million. Much of the funding was to promote recreational boating safety nationwide through various public service announcements and other outreach efforts. Funding is also available for voluntary standards for recreational boat manufacturing, educational initiatives for state officers investigating BUI and accident incidents, and various studies. In addition, the IBWSS is also funded under the National Nonprofit Organization Program and has been funded annually for decades. We anticipate the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the NOFO, to be posted for the National Nonprofit Organization Grant Program to be coming in the coming months. Historically, we used to post this in the first quarter of a fiscal year or early in the second quarter. Over the course of the last few years, the release date of the NOFO was pushed back for various reasons, including changes in the NOFO template and various new approval processes. One thing is key. Funding must be obligated by the end of the fiscal year. It may be possible to notify grantees in the beginning of the next fiscal year as long as our internal obligation process is done by September 30th. We anticipate having the NOFO out soon. When the NOFO is released, the timelines will be adjusted to ensure that we are able to obligate funding by the September 30th deadline. The nonprofit solicitation period we anticipate will only be 30 days of an open solicitation period. When the grantees, or I should say when the applicants read the NOFO clearly articulates the purpose of the funding, what we may be looking for in terms for specific projects, what is needed in terms for submission, directions for the narrative, and how applications are scored for the reviewers are also in the NOFO. In the past, we did have a follow-up period for clarification for your proposals. This may or may not be part of this year's solicitation, depending on the time frame that we have when the NOFO is posted. Again, it all boils down to us having to obligate the funding by September 30th. We do anticipate areas of interest to be in the NOFO coming up. Also, I would encourage applicants to stay within the page limit requirements. Draft your narrative to flow along with the reviewer criteria, since it makes it easier for the reviewers to actually score the applications and review them, and submit all the required attachments. When the application deadline is reached, the Grants Management Branch processes the application packages and assigns subject matter experts to review the applications. When the applications are reviewed and scored, we may reach out to the grantees for a clarification period. Ultimately, when the reviewers review the applications, they all get together to discuss the applications, determine as a group who is recommended for funding, and also provide an estimated funding list to go further up the chain. The recommended funding list from the reviewers gets sent to the division director for the division director to review and possibly provide his own recommendations. The same is true when it gets down to the office chief level. The office chief reviews the two sets of recommendations before him and may determine another set of recommendations to review. Ultimately, it does go to the Director of Prevention Policy, who is the final signatory when it gets down to the grants. However, the Director of Prevention Policy does have the opportunity to look at all the previous recommendations. It's all transparent when it gets to his level to review. Historically, this was the last approval before all the obligations and the grants were executed. Changes may be coming in how this is done, and that's still yet to be determined. And that, however, the upcoming NOFO will indicate if there are any changes to how this was done in the past. Speaking of changes, there are changes that will affect the National Nonprofit Organization Grant Program. The executive order from President Trump dated August 7th, 2025, improving the oversight of federal grant making, indicated much of these changes. Agencies must advance the president's priorities. The NOFO, as well as the final funding, must be approved by a political head. Previously, the NOFO was approved at the Division of Boating Safety level. This will require additional review internally before we release the NOFO. Final funding, like I said, is also approved by the political head. Previously, like we mentioned before, this was approved by the Director of Prevention Policy. We anticipate the Director of Division of Prevention Policy to still be a part of the approval process, but we are working on getting the political approval involved in the process. And last year, all obligations were approved at the Secretary level. This may change, and we are waiting for further guidance at this point. Other changes this year include that all assistance listings are to be approved at the DHS Undersecretary of Management level. This was a higher level than we have been used to get approvals for in the past. In addition, all programmatic terms and conditions now may be approved at the DHS Undersecretary of Management level as well. Previously in the past, it was approved at the division level. So we are getting used to the additional changes that are required. In addition, the DHS terms and conditions are yet to be updated for 2026. These are already approved at the DHS undersecretary level by the time we get them. So by the time you see these at the time of award, those have already been approved by DHS. In addition, we do anticipate changes coming up this year for the 2 CFR 200 grant regulations. We anticipate that to be coming later on this year. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.